to all. So today we can see John Dryden as a critic. So John Dryden, he belongs to the neoclassical age. He is rightly considered as the father of English criticism. With John Dryden, a new era of criticism began. So regarding the nature of poetry, Dryden follows Aristotle's views. So Aristotle defines poetry as a process of imitation. It imitates facts past or present, popular beliefs, superstitions, and things in their ideal form. So Dryden also upholds Aristotle's definition of poetry. So he also defines poetry as a process of imitation. And coming to the function of poetry, the final end of poetry according to Dryden is delight and transport rather than instruction. So delight, it gives pleasure, then transport, so it takes the readers to the age represented in the works of art. And instruction, teaching morals is also one of the ends of poetry, but Dryden insists more on delight and transport rather than on instruction. Then according to Dryden, a poet is neither a teacher nor a bare imitator, but a photographer, a creator. So a photographer, so he adds beauty to the photograph. So in the same way, the poet also creates. So he doesn't simply imitate nature, he adds his own ideas and he works with his imagination on what he sees in nature. So the poet is one who, with life or nature as his raw material, produces a new thing altogether, a work of art rather than a copy. So what he sees in nature or what he sees in life, that the poet uses as his raw material, and with his imagination and with his craftsmanship, he converts it into a work of art. Then of all the kinds of poetry, so classical writers, they speak of different kinds of poetry. There is drama, tragedy, and under drama we have tragedy and comedy, then epic. And among the kinds of poetry, drama claimed most of Dryden's attention. And regarding tragedy also, he follows the rules of Aristotle, the classical master. But regarding the introduction of unpalatable or incredible scenes such as battles and deaths on the stage, he says that death can never be imitated to a just height and it can be avoided. So certain violent actions, deaths, they will be reported rather than enacted on the stage. Dryden does not subscribe to the accepted interpretation of the three unities. So classical criticism, it insisted on three unities. There is unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. But Dryden considers the unities of time and place too rigorous. So because they leave no scope for the development of plot and character. Then tragedy. So tragedy, Dryden defends tragedy following Aristotle as an imitation of one entire great and probable action, not told but represented, which by moving in us fear and pity is conducive to the purging of those two emotions in our minds. So tragedy, as Dryden says, it must deal with a great action, and the hero of a tragedy, he should be of a high rank, and the action should be represented, not just narrated. And when it is enacted on the stage, the tragic hero's fall, it is brought about by his tragic flaw. And when his fall is represented on the stage, it moves in the audience fear and pity. And by moving the feelings of fear and pity, it purges of those two emotions in the minds of the readers. So the readers, they have a fear. Why? Because the hero belonging to a high rank, noble rank, so such a hero, he ends with a fall. And so they have a fear. So if such a thing happens to such a great hero, so the same thing may happen to we, the common people. And then another thing is the feeling of pity. So looking at the hero falling from a great height, so they have pity for the tragic hero. So by invoking the feeling of fear and pity, tragedy purges those two emotions in the minds of the audience. Then coming to comedy, Dryden has not much of his own to say on comedy. He follows only Aristotle. So following Aristotle, he calls it a representation of human life in inferior persons and low subjects. And regarding the end of comedy, Dryden says it should be delight and in first and instruction only the second. But tragedy, it must invoke the feeling of fear and pity, and it should purge those two emotions in the minds of the audience. But comedy, the first end of comedy is delight and the second end is instruction. But tragedy teaches us morals. That is, such a man of high rank, such a man of noble nature, so how he meets with a fall. So there it teaches a moral for the people to get rid of all those tragic flaws. But comedy, it should be, the end of comedy should be full and full delight. And then the characters in a comedy, they should be of lower quality, and then there should be minimum action, and the comedy points out the faults and vices of the characters, but those characters are not very wicked. Those drawbacks and demerits, they are not so wicked, but they are only the frailties of human nature. It is the weaknesses of human nature. And then another kind of poetry, it is epic. And regarding epic, Dryden, he goes with the French critics. So Aristotle considers the tragedy superior to the epic, but Dryden considers the epic superior to the tragedy. And according to Dryden, the epic is certainly the greatest work of human nature. And he preferred the tragedy to the epic. Aristotle, he preferred the tragedy to the epic, but here Dryden differs from Aristotle. In all the other things, he follows Aristotle very closely, but regarding his views on epic, he differs from Aristotle. He considers the epic superior to the tragedy. And then regarding the visual appeal of the tragedy, Dryden urges 3 points. That it is the actor's work as much as the poet's work. So if a tragedy appeals to the audience, so the actor as well as the poet, they have equal share. So that is what Dryden says. So it is the actor's work as much as the poet's work. And so the poet alone cannot deserve credit for it, that the stage is handicapped to show many things. So the poet alone cannot take credit. So only I am responsible for the success of the work, because the actor also has a part, equal part. And the stage, it has its own difficulties. That is, big armies cannot be presented on the stage. They can be only described in words. So all these things, they cannot be presented visually. And while readers have leisure to digest what they read in the epic, so why he considers the epic superior to the tragedy? So because in epic, the readers will have time to digest what they read in the epic. But in the tragedy, in the play, they miss many beauties. So the battles, big armies, all those things, they can be described elaborately in an epic. And the reader can digest in leisure. He can digest what he reads in the epic. But in a tragedy, that beauty is missing. So that is why Dryden considers the epic superior to the tragedy. And then again, Dryden disagrees with Aristotle in insisting on a moral in the epic. So Aristotle says that epic should teach a moral, but Dryden doesn't agree this idea. And so though Dryden is considered a neoclassical critic, but he feels that it is not the observance of rules that makes a work great, but its capacity to delight and transport. So simply following the rules alone cannot make a work great. So only if it gives delight and if it transports the audience to the age and atmosphere of the work of art, it can be considered a great work. And what is the function of criticism? So the function of criticism is not simply to detect the faults in a work of art, but it must also discover those great beauties that make it immortal. So the critic's duty is not only to find fault, his duty is to discover the great beauties that make the work immortal. And then the value of Dryden's criticism. So Dryden's criticism is partly a restatement of the principles of Aristotle, and then partly a plea for French neoclassicism, and partly a deviation from both. So he has followed Aristotle in certain respects, and then the French neoclassicist in certain aspects. And from Aristotle he learnt a respect for rules. French neoclassicism taught him to prefer the epic to tragedy. So French neoclassicists, they considered epic superior to tragedy. So Dryden also considers the epic superior to tragedy. And so insisting on a moral, so he goes with the French neoclassicist. And to the Latin writers Longinus and Saint Evremond, he owed a respect for his own judgment. So a writer should use his own judgment also. So he should not merely follow the rules blindly. So the writer should have his own judgment in writing a work of art. So Dryden is a liberal classicist. So he is a classicist, but he is a liberal classicist who would adjust the rules of the ancients to the genius of the age to which a poet writes. So the ancient rules, so they are really valuable, but all the rules cannot be applied to all the age. So he says, so he adjusted the rules of the ancients to the genius of the age to which a poet writes. So any poet, he can adapt the rules which are applicable to the age and the reader for whom he writes. Thank you.